Welcome. You're listening to the Leading Health Podcast by the Kansas Health Foundation. We have a bold vision to make Kansas the healthiest state in the nation. And it's not just a vision, it's a movement powered by people like you. You are one of the 30,000 Kansans invited to help us shift our state's future. We're your hosts, Ed O'Malley and Susan Kang.
In each episode, we move beyond the usual conversation about health, the doctors and deductibles. Instead, we talk about capital H health, our ability to thrive. This is your invitation to grab the Leading Health book and join the conversation as we work together to make Kansas the healthiest state in the nation.
Welcome back to another episode of Leading Health, our podcast where we dive into this book, Leading Health, How You and 30,000 Kansans Help Communities Thrive. This week, we're talking about Chapter 7. Chapter 7 is that it's a leadership challenge because we don't agree on what caused the problem or the solution. Susan, it is awesome to be back with you doing our podcast. We're well into this now. We're having a lot of fun, aren't we?
Totally. I'm having a great time, and I'm really excited to talk about this chapter. I feel like I'm always excited to be talking about all of our chapters, honestly.
Well, of course. And this
cool.
But this chapter is different because this chapter we're going to be joined by a new guest. So for the first time, we'll have Ben Hutton. We'll do a proper introduction of Ben here in just a little bit, but President and CEO of Hutton Company based here in Wichita. It'll be awesome having him join us here in just a little while. You know, last episode we had Jonathan Sublette from Topeka. We've had a great kind of lineup of people joining us to help us flesh out these ideas. We're still in the part of the book where we're trying to help readers and now listeners or viewers of this podcast understand that, yes, climbing the health rankings, yes, going from our low point of 31st all the way up to first, which is our objective. Mm-hmm. Yes, that is going to require a lot of thinking about health. But it actually is first and foremost a leadership challenge, not a health challenge. So we're right in the middle of part 2 of the book. We're trying to land that idea. In this podcast, we're trying to explore that idea with our guests, and we're having a good time.
So I think one way that we're challenging those, ideas and understanding that it is a leadership challenge is in this chapter, you talk about disrupting deeply entrenched narratives around health. And if we're going to make progress on closing the health gap, which is a totally adaptive challenge, tell us why that is the case and why that's important for us to know how to deal with that, which is an adaptive challenge versus a technical challenge.
Yeah, I think what we're playing with here is that leadership is always about disruption. Mm-hmm. And when we've been as a state falling in the health rankings from our high point of number 8 all the way down to number 31. And as we've explored on this podcast, a pretty steady fall up until the last few years, which for the first time, Kansas Health, the state of Kansas, for the first time, the state of Kansas has climbed better in the health rankings for 3 consecutive years. Mm-hmm. That's a big deal. That's attributed to a lot of people doing a lot of things. But when you're sliding like that for as long as Kansas had been sliding, you have to question everything. Mm-hmm. And it's not a situation where the way we turn that around is just to dive into, the health textbooks. We have to really question how are we doing things? How are we trying to solve this problem? The great, wonderful people who get up every day and work on health, how much of solving that problem, the slide in the rankings, actually belongs to them versus, as we're trying to make in this book, how much of solving that problem belongs to what we call the 30,000, the Kansans who are in key roles of civic authority in business life and elected life and in the faith community. So leadership is always about disrupting how we think before we get to actually making progress. And I think that's what we're getting at in this chapter.
So tell me a little bit about how the 30,000 need to help create alignment between the problem and the solution and the path forward.
During COVID, I became obsessed with trying to think about what's the role of authority in solving tough problems. Like you and I know leadership is an activity, it's not a position.
Right.
We explore that in this book. We talked about that earlier in this book.
Right.
Leadership is an activity, it's not a position. Now, a lot of people would agree with that. But then most people, and I think myself 20, 25 years ago would have said, yeah, but it's an activity for people in key roles of authority. And now I think that's been debunked, right? I think there's plenty of knowledge and wisdom now in the world that says, no, it's just an activity, period. Whether you have authority or not is an interesting question. But Rosa Parks didn't have authority, and she exercised tremendous leadership. So leadership must not be related to authority is what we began to explore. So during COVID, I became obsessed with thinking about, okay, if leadership and authority are two different things, and sometimes people in authority exercise leadership, and sometimes they don't.
Right.
Leadership is really rare. What I became obsessed with was, well, okay, but specifically, what do we need from those in authority when it comes to deep, daunting, the language we use, adaptive challenges?
Right.
Like, what's the role of those? And I remember watching during COVID, and I think one of the big mistakes a lot of people in authority made, and I'm not, saying they're horrible people. They were under a lot of pressure, but I think one of the mistakes a lot of people in authority made was trying to proclaim solutions, trying to say, here's exactly what we need to do. And I think on deep, daunting challenges, like, this is a long answer to your question, Susan, but like trying to close the health gap, like trying to climb the health rankings, one of the roles of authority is to get people focused on the problem, first and foremost, like center the problem. I don't think people in authority, I don't think, the healthcare CEOs, I don't think the wonderful people in public health, I don't think they have the ability to fully solve this all by themselves. So other people in roles of authority helping say, this is the issue that matters. This is something we have to align around. This is something that is important to us in our company, in our organization, in our state, in our community, is one of the roles we're talking about. And when we talk about creating alignment, I think that's what we're talking about. Like, let's first align on this problem matters. That's a large part of what we're trying to do here at KHF the last couple of years is get key people in the state to say the fact that we fell in the health rankings matters.
Yeah. Well, I also love there's a part in the book where you talk about you don't have to define the whole problem. Not in one big chunk immediately, right? One of the things we can do is to define what is our part in this problem, situation, topic, issue.
The whole idea of it's so much easier to define somebody else's part of the mess.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like every faith tradition, every spiritual tradition has a version of before you criticize the speck in your neighbor's eye, take the plank out of your own, which I think is just a way of saying on these deep, daunting challenges, we literally all have a part of the mess.
Yeah.
My part, your part might not be the whole problem, but it's literally like your part. And like if we can just help people define what's your part of the mess of this kind of slide in health. And if you think about it, like if we can just help, we're going to be joined by Ben here in a little bit. If we can help a business understand what's their part of this, if we can help an elected official, think about like a school board member who might think, what do I have to do with health? Well, you have a lot to do with health. If we can just help them understand their part,
right,
and if we can define our part, the problem is usually not that big.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like it's a practical way for us, for members of the 30,000 and others who are working with members of the 30,000, right, to identify some practical and concrete ways to figure out how to make progress in helping Kansas close the health gap. And so that's what I like about that. And the other thing, and one last thing I'm going to ask you about is, so you distinguish between goals and strategies in the way that we can make progress on our daunting challenges. So I'm just, I feel like that is also a little bit of a practical step. People can understand the difference and, and take steps that way. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think what we're playing with on that idea, Susan, is that especially those in authority, the 30,000 people in key roles of authority, one of the things that we need them to do is to help people understand the difference between our goals and our preferred strategies to get there. A lot of us have different ideas for how to create a healthier workforce in a company, a healthier community,
Right.
a healthier state. And what often happens is we often end up debating our preferred strategies before we've gotten alignment on, but what's the goal? And it's one of the special roles of people in authority is to help people see the difference and say, you know what? We can debate strategies in a while, but can we first get agreement that this goal matters? And can we first kind of explore what makes progress on this goal difficult? And what we found, what research shows, is when people in authority help others kind of see the difference between a goal and a strategy. So a strategy is to do Medicaid expansion. A goal is to make sure as many Kansans as possible have adequate health insurance.
Yeah, 100%.
Medicaid expansion is not a goal. It's a strategy to achieve a goal. When people in authority, my experience and the research shows that when people in authority help others see the difference between those things, those groups end up making progress faster, which is really a beautiful thing.
Love it.
So much more to explore, but let's explore it with our friend Ben. So Ben Hutton, for those who haven't been exposed to Ben, he's a creative thinker. He is one of the most innovative business CEOs that I've ever known. He leads Hutton Company, which is based here in Wichita, but doing work across the state, has built an amazing team, and we're excited to have him on this podcast with us to explore this chapter.
I am too. Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation with Ben.
Let's bring him up.
So excited to have you.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
What's really notable about your appearance today is that you are the first and really, I think, only person who represents the private sector.
Fantastic.
Well, not in the
pressure.
world. You're the person of this podcast at this moment.
Yeah, I'm just saying, just right now. I'm just saying right now. Well, but
Okay,
I'll try
and do a good job at that.
But what's so interesting, Ben, is you are in some ways an amazing representative of the private sector. In other ways, you kind of have a whole different approach to how you run your company, to how you have created a successful enterprise. So on one hand, you're an example of, on the other hand, you might be a model of what we need more private sector companies to think about.
Okay, now there's a lot of pressure on you if you're the model here.
I feel it.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. That's really great. But thank you for being here with us and letting us ask you some questions about some of these concepts.
Sure. Yeah, I'm excited to share my perspective. That's an important topic, and I'm glad that we're having this discussion in our state.
So you know that at KHF we talk about the capital H health, which we define as, everything that we need to thrive, as opposed to the small H health, which is just healthcare, which is also important, but only part of capital H health, right? So in your organizations, as CEO of Hutton and as a member of the 30,000, how does health, the capital H health, come into play in your organizations? And are there some elements of capital H health that you might be focused on right now that might be helpful, for us to know about?
Well, we think about little h health and capital H health both at our company. From the little h perspective, of course, we want to provide great health insurance benefits to our team members and help them focus on that part of their life. But bigger than that, our purpose statement at Hutton is together we exist to build life into our team members' dreams, client's vision, and community's future. And we really see a role for our company in helping our team members achieve the dreams that they have in their life, which I think is really what capital H health is all about. If they're not little h health healthy, they have a hard time doing that. And so we help them get there. But then beyond that, we talk a lot about what they want to achieve in their life. Why do they show up to work every day? Who or what are they working for? And how can we help them pursue those dreams? And so we have things like chaplain services or assistance funds, provide time off for volunteering, things that build the vitality and wholeness of life outside of just the Blue Cross Blue Shield health insurance program we provide, which is great and everybody loves it.
I want to just dig a little bit because, Ben, you are an avid reader. I know you read a lot of books. And I know a few years ago, you read a book called The Dream Manager.
Yep.
Is that the name of it?
It is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Great little book.
Yeah.
And the book is about this idea of putting in place a process to help your team members identify, like name their dream and then achieve it. And you all have implemented that process in your company. I happened to have a conversation recently with one of your dream coaches, and I was just so inspired. So talk about an example of capital H health. Can you just describe what that looks like? Because again, it's a phenomenal example of how to not just say we care about capital H health, but to actually have something incredibly tangible to bring it to life.
Yeah. So our purpose statement does say we want to help our team members pursue their dreams in life. And we actually had that as our purpose statement for a couple of years before one day I woke up and I said, that sounds great, but what are we doing? Like, how are we actually doing that? And it was then that I remembered that previously I had read this book about a company that did exactly that. And so we copied their playbook and we hired a dream manager, a coach to help facilitate conversations with our team members and their families to really identify what it is that they're passionate about in their work and life, and then help them make plans to pursue those dreams and goals. We've had some amazing things happen. We're on our third cohort of team members going through the program. We've had one of our team members took a trip and climbed Machu Picchu with his brother. Another bought a house. Another went back to school. Another is sending their children to college for the first time in their family. And so some really amazing things that have so much meaning to those team members. I think in business, oftentimes, and especially like the business school version of business, we assume people show up at work because of the paycheck or the benefits that we provide. And those are all important. Like we learn about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in Psychology 101 with the 700 people in the big auditorium our freshman year. K-State, go Cats.
Go Cats.
But we move pretty quickly beyond that bottom tier. I mean, when we satisfy some of those initial needs of security, we look up pretty quickly and say, like, what else is there? And what am I excited about in life? And where do I find joy and passion? And where is my spot to plug in the community? And that's where I think we get a lot more reward. So it's been rewarding for our company to see our team members' eyes glimmer when they get glimpses of that themselves. And it's been really rewarding for me as the leader of our business to help people do that.
That's an incredible story. Yeah, incredible.
That sounds like such amazing examples of thriving.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? That's just fabulous.
Well, and Susan, I'd bet a lot of money that those people and their families who have been impacted through the Dream Manager process in your company, Ben, I would bet a lot of money that on more traditional lower H health measures, they are healthier.
100%.
And that's the point. Like, health isn't like the percent of our health that is attributed to doctors' offices and dental visits. While those things are critically important, and we love all the doctors, and we love all the dentists, and we love all the nurses, and we love all the healthcare professionals, but our health is so much more impacted by the things like you were just describing. Is our family in a home for the first time? Those things matter, and they set the trajectory for health for generations. All right, we went big picture, Susan.
So, at the beginning of this episode where Ed and I were talking about sort of aligning problems with solutions. And so because you have like 7 different companies, right, under Hutton, I can imagine that you have a bunch of different people who feel like, I know what the problem is and I know exactly what the solutions are. So curious to know how you might align the problem and solution when you've got a bunch of people who are sort of experts at doing that.
Sometimes more successfully than others. How's that for an answer? No, I think it's actually what I spend quite a bit of my time doing is trying to focus people on the right problems and searching for the right solutions for those. One of the frames that I like to use for this is another book that I've read that I love by Simon Sinek, where it's called The Infinite Game.
Okay.
And he talks about how we look at business in 2 different frames, as one, a finite game, or things we can win or lose, or infinite games, or games that go on forever. So putting it back into this conversation, health is not something we get to win. Like, it will go on forever.
Yeah.
And the way we approach things like that have to be different than things that are finitely measurable. A response that is time limited and critical during COVID is somewhat a finite game. But how we move from 31st to first in health in Kansas over decades
And
is
then
different,
and then stay there.
Right.
is infinite. And so we have to have different approaches. So we have to frame up: are we chasing something that is finite and achievable soon, or infinite? And then I think we have to give permission to leaders that have influence and knowledge to experiment. So one of the blessings that I think I have in the private sector that doesn't always exist in the public sector is my ability to move fast and try things, especially when those experiments or decisions are reversible. So in our company, we have a frame that we call $50,000 experiments. So every year, I want to try something just a little bit crazy enough.
We know about those things here.
Oh, yeah. That's true. You take risks. That's one of your values, right?
That's what we do.
But a big enough experiment that if it works, it's going to be something amazing, but small in scale enough that if it doesn't work, then we learn something and we move on. And I think private sector businesses and in some nonprofits that are working at the edges of some of this health problem should be taking more risk and doing more experiments, because sometimes it's easier to bring people along with results or examples than with arguments or ideas. And so we love experiments.
Two big things you just said that I think are applicable for all the 30,000, right? So the 30,000 Kansans in roles of civic authority. These are pastors, rabbis, university presidents, college deans, school superintendents, community-minded business CEOs, elected officials at all levels, appointed officials. Two big things you just mentioned that I think are ways for the 30,000 to think about their role on improving health. One of them is focusing people on the right problems. Like that, and I love the way you talked about it. My follow-up question in just a minute is going to be, how do you help people define right? How do you help people define what the right problem is? But it sounds like such a great example of what do we need from the 30,000. We don't need the 30,000 to solve everything. We need them to do their part. We don't need people in authority to solve everything. We need them to do their part. And the second thing you talked about is experimentation. And the way I interpreted that is, like, we need the 30,000 to help create an environment where the people working on this can experiment in the way you just described. It's not a risk-free experiment, but we need the environment where people feel like they can take those risks. So I love that, and I think it's some great instruction to the 30,000. But yeah, how do we help people define what right means when we're helping them focus on the right problems?
So I think this gets back to root cause analysis, or looking past the immediate symptoms that may draw our attention and trying to find what are the issues or problems that we can solve that unlock or solve future problems that we don't even see yet. So one of the reasons I love a leading indicator like third grade literacy, right? Focusing our attention all the way back at that point pays dividends 5 and 10 and even 15 years down the road. Whereas, that might show up in challenges getting a job or purchasing a home or having access to healthcare. If we can solve those problems a problem back in third grade, then we prevent many more things down the line.
That sounds like going upstream, and really getting at the cause of the problem initially.
Yes. Yeah.
So that sounds really great. One of the things that came up for me as you were talking about experimenting is this notion that Ed talks about at KHF, which is failing fast and failing forward.
Yeah.
So with your $50,000 experiments, the idea that you probably learned something from some of these failures, right?
Yep.
And that makes your second experiment even better. Or it allows for a third experiment that you didn't think about before. And I love that you have that mindset. I think that's one of the things that we need to make progress on adaptive challenges.
Yeah, I think we always learn something from them, even if all we learn is that didn't work.
Right.
Then that is valuable.
That's
because
data.
So often we get anchored into this, I've got this great idea, I want to try it. And we tell 7 people about it, and I've got this idea. And it's like, We spent so much time talking about it. We could have tried it already and moved on when it didn't work to something that might. And so experiments are super valuable.
No, I love that.
Just try it.
That.
Small ways.
Well, in good ways and bad ways. Like one of the best ways to let somebody know their idea is a bad one is just let them try it.
Yeah,
right?
go for it. Yeah, it's okay.
And it might actually work, and then we're the fool, right?
Yeah,
we're the ones who thought it was a bad idea.
Yeah, I've done that several times with my kids. It's like, sounds like a bad idea, but go for it. Let me know how that turns out. And sometimes they prove me wrong. So, right, it's great.
Or they prove you right. And
yeah,
like, okay, well,
it's like,
it's a good lesson learned, right?
Yeah, I guess Dad's not so dumb, but it's okay.
I want to go back to this notion of disrupting entrenched ideas or, interpretations and narratives that we might have. And you're sort of in your company or, or elsewhere, right? Can you talk about a time when you felt like you had to become curious about challenging the narrative that you had, this, that was potentially an entrenched narrative that you needed to disrupt to make progress?
Yeah, I mean, I'd go back a little bit to the example that I had earlier, or that we talked about earlier, about the dream manager. The core assumption there that I had to challenge is why do people work inside of our organization? Because there was a lot of blank faces and stares when I said, hey, I have this idea and I want to try this thing. And they're like, man, we're a construction company where we want sticks and bricks and we want to talk about paychecks and hard measurable things.
Yeah.
And I showed up in the room and I'm talking about dreams and visions and love and human connection. And they're like, who the heck is this guy, right? And so we had to challenge, like, well, why do you show up at work, Jim? Why do you come to work, Steve? And when you peel back the layers, there's always something more human underneath of it. And so that was one example. The other example that I would throw out would be just from the purpose of our business perspective. I mean, I think we go to business school, we grow up in our economics classes, and we learn about shareholder value and profit and loss statements and balance sheets. And that becomes the frame that we measure the impact of business through and how we judge success. And I think that's part of it. Like, I love all of those things, but I think it's just a small piece of the picture of what it can be. And so I've had to challenge for our organization how we are measuring success outside of those instruments. And ultimately, the proof is in the pudding. It works well. And I think the ironic thing is actually businesses that are run from a purpose and values perspective end up more profitable, stronger businesses on the balance sheet in the end. But it takes a while for people to come around to that, and it takes a while to prove it. So,
Ben, I'm glad you went to where you did at the very end of that, because I want to, without disclosing, the company's P&L and balance sheet and all that kind of stuff. But my guess is that the interventions, a little bit of a wonky word there, the efforts, the experiments you all have done to work on capital H health have ended up contributing to your company being more successful in those traditional measures. Is that fair to say?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
But what I love about the story you told is you had to get people to question their own narratives about how do we make the company successful in the traditional sense. And you still have to do all that traditional sense stuff.
Yeah.
So my guess is you weren't telling your team, and I can picture some of your senior people saying like, what? You want us to do what? You weren't telling them that we're going to stop doing all that business school stuff.
Yeah.
You were in essence saying, but we have to layer in.
This is a both and thing.
Yeah.
Like we can't be really great at all this human perspective stuff and then suck at being a contractor or a designer.
Yeah,
the business doesn't work anymore.
You've got to build good building.
Right.
Yeah.
And so back in health, I mean, we have to have the little h health with the big H too.
Yeah.
Like it has to be both. It's not one or the other.
Yeah.
We gotta have both.
Yeah. And having great big H health helps the little H health,
for sure.
right? I mean, this is, I think, they're healthier. They want to come to work. There's less absenteeism, less presenteeism. And I love the holistic approach that you take, right? So the whole person, not just the person who just shows up, not just the work Ben or work Susan or work Ed, right?
Yeah.
I mean, this is, we're more than just ourselves at work.
Yeah.
And I love that approach. And I think that's really helpful.
Ben, you used the term both and a minute ago, and I'd love for you just to flesh that out a little bit, because I think this chapter is kind of asking people to do a lot of, quote unquote, both and things. It's saying that, yes, like you can be an advocate for your preferred strategy to improve health, whatever that might be. And you can understand we need to find alignment with people who have other preferred strategies. And I think leadership is often a lot about like standing in the ambiguity of being clear in what you believe, but also understanding just being clear about you on what you believe isn't enough. You have to connect with others. So there's a kind of we have to do both those things. From just a leadership perspective in general, I see you as somebody who I think whether you consciously do it or it's subconscious, you embody that ability to kind of hold two things or multiple things at the same time and not feel overly defined by any one of them. And I'd love to just hear you riff on that. I'm not really sure what question I'm asking, but does it make sense to you?
Well, first, I think I don't think I or any leader has a monopoly on great ideas. And so I want to recognize that I don't have the full perspective on any issue in front of my business or in front of our state. And so while I may have a viewpoint that's informed by all of the 30 years of history I have in business and growing up here, I don't get it all. And so I have to be open to hearing other people's ideas. I think the other thing is we have to recognize that we can both be right sometimes. It's not a competition of I get to win and Ed has to lose for me to win. Yeah. Both of these ideas or concepts or beliefs can be correct and right, especially on a problem as big as health in a state with millions of people. Like there are going to be different strategies that work with different populations in different parts of our state, and giving the freedom and opportunity for leaders that are close to those issues or close to those people to advocate for them, I think is a leader's job, is my job, and everybody's. So
we say several times in this book, like to lead the nation in health, it's going to take some really great conservative ideas and some really great progressive ideas and a whole bunch of ideas in the middle, and like understanding that intellectually, which I think is basically a truth. Like it's going to require that. Doesn't mean that we can't also then have our preferred things that we're advocating for. So a lot of good stuff.
I think one of the tragedies that I've observed happen in our nation, and it's true in Kansas over the last decade or so, is that we have moved largely, I think, away from advocating for my ideas to advocating against the ideas of my political enemies. And so we've formed these tribes, and if it doesn't matter how great your idea is, I can't be for it because then it would risk my identity as part of the tribe that I'm in. And I think that's a horrible place for our society to be in. We need to be for things.
Yeah, I mean, that's built-in resistance, you know?
And Susan, I know we probably have one more question we want to sneak in before we have to end, but I do want to just riff on that for a second. I think in some ways, what we're trying to do, I love that, Ben. You just said instead of advocating for our ideas, we're advocating against other people's ideas. And I think one thing we're trying to do in this book, and we touch on in this chapter, is in essence say, we actually need the 30,000 to go a step further and say, we need you to advocate for the centering of this problem or opportunity. I think it's an opportunity to lead the nation in health. When Kansas leads the nation in health, it's going to help everything in Kansas. Like it's going to help our economy. Our research has shown that it's going to help all kinds of things. But it's like, how do we center the problem, like advocate for the problem getting attention,
Yeah.
And
number one. Yeah.
And I think what I found is when we get people talking in a healthy way together about a daunting challenge, they usually end up finding common ground. Yeah. But if they start like they're not talking about the problem, they're talking about what they don't like about your ideas, right? There's not the opportunity to find some common ground. Yeah. I love the way you framed that. Like We got to get beyond arguing against other people's ideas.
Ben, we were talking about the differences between strategies and goals. How do you find or help people to identify the common goal to get their work done?
So I think goals are really important because they provide the North Star that everybody can look to periodically for guidance and make sure we're all tracking in the right direction. Strategies is where I do think we have to provide more freedom for experimentation, tying back to what we said earlier. So like in our organization, we set some really big, long-term, high-level goals. And then we provide a lot of freedom to teams within our company to come up with strategies every quarter, every year to go and try. And then all of that information and data gets fed back to the company at large so that in the next iteration, people can play off of that or adopt what worked or ignore what didn't. And so I think we need to be rigid and explicit with goals. Our goals should not be something that is changing, but our strategies, I think, have to change and adapt with the learning that comes with trying and implementing them.
An amazing conversation. Ben, it's our first one with you. You'll be back, I believe, for a couple other chapters. I think next time we'll see you is when we're talking about chapter 18, which is about embracing bold vision. I can't wait for that. But to close out this episode, Susan, you usually want us to end with a key takeaway.
So actually, what I love, my takeaway here is two people can be right at the same time. And I think that I'm going to be thinking about that for a long time, Ben. And I encourage our listeners to actually think about this. I mean, are you arguing for your position, or positing your position, or are you arguing for someone else against someone else's position? So I mean, that's my takeaway.
I like that one. The takeaway that I would have would be a little bit of a spin on something I said earlier in terms of experiments. I think sometimes we need to wait for permission and enroll a lot of people in our visions and ideas and strategies, and other times we don't need to wait for permission to try something cool or great that may have a tremendous impact. And so it's a leadership skill to know when is the right strategy. But I think in the private sector especially, more often than not, small, fast, quick experiments that give us information are a route we should be exploring more.
I love it.
Yeah.
A lot of things on my mind. The thing I want to end with is just calling back to, Ben, something you said, that you think a key part of your role is to help people focus on the right problems. And so for members of the 30,000 who are listening, maybe you're a city council member, maybe you're a school board member, maybe you're a nonprofit executive, community-minded business person, you might just think about when you're advocating for something in community in life and civic life, are you advocating for your preferred solution to what you think is one of the right problems? Or are you using your authority to advocate for helping people focus on the right problems? Those are two big differences. Ben, thanks for illuminating that for us and for our listeners. It's been a great conversation. Our next episode, we'll dive into chapter 8, and Kenny Wilk from the University of Kansas Health System will be back with us to explore how our existing assumptions often get in our own way. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. Before we leave, there are a couple ways you can help. The first, visit kansashealth.org/leadinghealth to claim your copy of the book and join in the efforts as we work together to make Kansas the healthiest state in the nation. The second is to share this podcast with your network. Also, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment from whatever platform you use to get your podcast.